History remembers the men who commanded the war, not the ones who carried it. The speeches, the strategies, the symbols, these dominate our memory of the Second World War. But behind every decision made in distant rooms stood soldiers whose names never reached the textbooks, men who fought in mud, fire, and silence, and whose actions bent the war itself in ways few ever realized. Some fought alone, some reshaped entire battles, some entered hell by choice. One wasn't even human. Yet their stories faded behind the shadows of giants. Who were these men? And how did their lives, often unknown, carve themselves into the heartbeat of the war? Today, we walk in their footsteps. Through the cities they liberated, the machines they commanded, the prisons they endured, and the impossible missions they survived. 6 lives, 6 stories, each revealing a different face of courage and a different cost. Across the vast fronts of the Second World War, heroism rarely appeared in the form of grand strategy or polished speeches. More often, it lived in the quiet decisions made by ordinary soldiers, men who stepped forward when no one else would, and whose choices carried consequences far beyond what they could have imagined. Among them was a young French-Canadian who never sought recognition, never commanded troops, and never waited for orders when action called his name. His war began not in triumph, but in the mud and terror of Normandy. And from there, his story became something no one expected. This is where our journey begins with Leo Major. He was a volunteer scout, one of the few roles where survival depended more on instinct than on rank or equipment. While artillery thundered inland and the tide carried debris back toward the sea, Leo moved with a calm that startled the men around him. He pushed forward, always forward, scanning for ambushes, mapping routes, and guiding others through terrain scarred by German fire. Leo was small in stature, but stubborn to the core, serving with Le Régiment de la Chaudière. Where others sought cover, Leo asked for the role that demanded exposure. Scout and sniper, out ahead of the main line, where a single mistake could mean vanishing without a trace. To his officers, he was an asset. To his comrades, he was something else entirely. A man who seemed to treat fear as a challenge, not a warning. In June 1944, as Allied forces crossed the Channel toward Normandy, Leo was among them. The sea was rough, the landing craft crowded, the air thick with diesel and anticipation. When the ramp dropped on Juno Beach, machine gun fire and mortar blasts greeted them. Men who had trained for years were cut down in seconds. Yet in that chaos, Leo moved with a strange, deliberate calm, picking his way through obstacles, scanning for threats, guiding others forward. He was not reckless, but he was utterly unwilling to be pinned down. Over the following weeks, as the Allies pushed inland through the labyrinth of hedgerows and ruined villages, Leo Major became known for something unusual. He kept returning from patrols with prisoners. Not one or two, sometimes entire German detachments, disarmed and shaken, herded back by a single Canadian with an almost casual confidence. He studied the terrain, the routines, the weaknesses. Where a standard soldier saw danger, Leo saw opportunity. Then, in the fighting around Caen, his war should have ended. During a patrol, a white-hot burst of light shattered the night. A phosphorus grenade exploded close by. Burning fragments seared into his face. The blast damaged his right eye badly enough that any normal soldier would have been evacuated and sent home. Medics dressed the wound. A specialist examined him and delivered the verdict. His fighting days were over. Leo Major disagreed. He accepted the bandages, accepted the loss of depth perception, but refused the idea of being removed from the front. In his mind, as long as he could see through one eye and pull a trigger, he was still useful. He returned to his unit as a one-eyed scout, a man who had been maimed and had simply decided that it was not sufficient reason to stop. It changed him. Not into a caricature, but into something harder to break. By 1945, as the war dragged toward its bloody conclusion, Leo's reputation within his regiment was clear. If a task demanded someone to move ahead alone, in darkness and uncertainty, his name rose to the surface. He had been burned, wounded, and nearly killed, and yet he continued to volunteer for the most dangerous work. That reputation led him to a small Dutch city called Zwolle. In April of that year, the Netherlands remained under German occupation. Zwolle, a historic city of narrow streets and canals, was held by German forces preparing either to fight or to withdraw on their own terms. Allied commanders feared that a conventional assault could lead to heavy casualties among both soldiers and civilians. They needed information, numbers, positions, intentions. A reconnaissance patrol was ordered. Leo Major stepped forward. So did his friend, Corporal Wilfred Arsenault. Under cover of darkness, the two men slipped toward the city. The night was cold, the streets ahead silent but tense. Somewhere inside were German patrols, machine gun nests, command posts. Any misstep would be fatal. Their orders were clear: scout, observe, return. They did not go according to plan. As Leo and Wilfred penetrated deeper into Zwolle, they encountered a German patrol. A firefight erupted at close range, shattering the fragile quiet of the night. In the exchange, Wilfred Arsenault was hit and killed. For Leo, the loss was both personal and immediate. The mission had turned from reconnaissance into survival. At that moment, every reasonable instinct pointed toward withdrawal. He was alone, deep in enemy-held streets, his comrade dead, his path back uncertain. No one would have blamed him for returning to Allied lines with the news that the city was too heavily defended. Leo Major chose differently. Instead of retreating, he advanced. He slipped through alleys and side streets, using the city's layout as cover. He captured a German soldier, then another, forcing them at gunpoint to guide him through their own positions. He made it clear that a large Canadian force was poised to attack, and that resistance would bring devastation down on the city. He escorted his prisoners back to their officers, repeating the message. The Allies were coming, and holding Zwolle would mean needless bloodshed. Between these encounters, Leo used grenades and small arms fire to create the illusion of a much larger assault. Bursts of gunfire erupted in one quarter, then another, as he moved. To German soldiers hearing shots and shouts in the night, it sounded like the leading edge of a full-scale offensive. Confusion spread. Reports of contact multiplied. The sense of being surrounded grew. A single one-eyed Canadian was manufacturing the impression of an invasion. Hour after hour, Leo kept up the pressure. He offered officers a chance to withdraw without destroying the city. Some dismissed him, others listened. Under mounting uncertainty and fearing encirclement, German troops began to pull out. Vehicles were heard moving away. Positions were abandoned in haste. By dawn, Zwolle was quiet. When Canadian forces advanced later, expecting bitter street fighting, they found something else. A city largely evacuated of its occupiers, spared a costly battle. Citizens emerged from their homes to find not columns of retreating Germans, but a small group of Canadian soldiers, and at the heart of the story, a one-eyed scout who had spent the night turning bluff, audacity, and calculated violence into liberation. The people of Zwolle did not forget him. In the decades that followed, they would honor Leo Major as the man who freed their city almost single-handedly. Yet for many years, beyond those streets and those memories, his name remained largely unknown. He was not a general. He commanded no division, but in that single night, the course of an entire community shifted because one wounded man refused to accept the limits placed upon him. As Leo was stalking shadows in the Netherlands, another man was carving his own brutal reputation into the armor of a Tiger tank. His name was Michael Wittmann. Michael Wittmann's war began not in the steel walls of a Tiger tank, but on the open roads of Europe. He served first as a motorcycle reconnaissance soldier, weaving between front lines, learning to read terrain, routes, and enemy movement with instinctive precision. It was dangerous work, fast, exposed, lethal, but it taught him something essential: how to see the flow of a battlefield before others could sense it. That instinct would one day make him one of the most feared tank commanders of the war. When Wittmann transitioned into armored warfare, he entered a world where survival depended on calculation measured in seconds. He began in the Sturmgeschütz 3, supporting infantry with deliberate, methodical fire. But it was not until he was assigned to the Tiger I, the heaviest, most formidable tank of its time, that his abilities truly aligned with his machine. For Wittmann, the Tiger became an extension of his will. Its 88mm cannon struck targets at ranges other tanks considered impossible. Its armor shrugged off hits that would have torn lesser vehicles apart. And inside that steel giant, Wittmann developed a calm, disciplined aggression. He studied his crew, trusted them, relied on them. Together, they moved with a unity that set them apart from others in their regiment. On the Eastern Front, that unity became a weapon. Wittmann's Tiger, carved through Soviet armor across wide plains and shattered villages, where hundreds of tanks clashed in chaotic battles. Reports spoke of engagements where Wittmann destroyed multiple enemy vehicles in minutes, using terrain, timing, and the Tiger's raw power to devastating effect. To Soviet crews, his appearance on the battlefield became a harbinger of catastrophe. To German tank units struggling to hold the line, he was a symbol of defiance amid overwhelming odds. Yet the very reputation he gained would thrust him into one of the most dramatic armored encounters of the war. In June 1944, the Allies had established a foothold in Normandy. British forces were advancing toward the French town of Villers-Bocage, pushing inland with tanks, transports, and infantry. The column was stretched along a narrow road, long, exposed, yet unaware of the danger watching them from the hills. Wittmann saw an opportunity where others saw only risk. Before German reinforcements could arrive, he chose to act alone. He drove his Tiger down into the valley, engine roaring, turret already swinging toward the first British tanks. What followed was a rapid, brutal assault that took even seasoned soldiers by surprise. In minutes, British Cromwells and Fireflies were burning on the roadside. Transports were torn apart, vehicles jammed the route, blocking retreat and movement. Wittmann maneuvered with precision, striking from angles that prevented the British from coordinating a defense. His Tiger advanced like a blunt, unstoppable instrument, firing, reversing, charging again, a rhythm of mechanical destruction that collapsed an entire armored column. It became one of the most studied tank actions of the war. To German officers, Villers-Bocage was proof of what one Tiger, commanded with skill and audacity, could achieve. To the Allies, it was a wake-up call, an urgent demonstration that the Tiger could not be confronted casually. Tactics changed, ranges increased, commanders adapted quickly, knowing they could not allow another attack like Wittmann's to unfold unchecked. But the battlefield views men like Wittmann differently than history does. Skill draws praise, reputation draws attention, and attention eventually draws fire. By August 1944, Wittmann was engaged again, this time near Saint-Aignan-de-Cramesnil. The Allies were stronger, more coordinated, and increasingly determined to eliminate the Tiger threat. As Wittmann's tank moved across open ground, it became a marked target. Several Allied units fired on his position, British, Canadian, even Polish forces. In the confusion of battle, the exact shot that destroyed his Tiger has never been definitively agreed upon. What is known as this: the Tiger was struck violently. The turret was blown clear. No one inside survived. Wittmann's rise had been meteoric, and his end was instantaneous. In the years that followed, his legacy became a source of fascination and debate. Some viewed him as a tactical prodigy. Others condemned the cause he fought for, arguing that skill in battle cannot be separated from the regime it serves. Even today, his name evokes a mixture of respect, fear, and controversy. But in the moment his Tiger burned on the French plain, one truth held firm. Another figure of myth had fallen, consumed by the same war that had elevated him. And for every man who rose through destruction, there were those who faced a different kind of darkness, not the thunder of armor or the shock of battle, but a world built entirely on suffering and death. War exalts some and consumes others, but one man walked willingly into the darkest place on earth. There are battles fought with rifles, and others fought with silence. Witold Pilecki chose the latter. In 1940, as Poland lay crushed beneath German occupation, reports began to circulate about a place called Auschwitz. At first, even resistance leaders struggled to understand what it truly was. A prison camp, they were told, a labor site, harsh, yes, but not yet comprehensible in its full horror. Pilecki did not accept uncertainty. An officer in the Polish Home Army, he volunteered for a mission without precedent to allow himself to be captured by German forces and sent inside Auschwitz. Not to escape, but to remain, to observe, to organize, to report the truth from within a system designed to erase those who entered it. In September 1940, during a street roundup in Warsaw, Pilecki deliberately stepped forward. He was beaten, arrested, and transported in a cattle car alongside hundreds of others. When the gates of Auschwitz closed behind him, he became prisoner number 4859. Inside the camp, death was routine and unpredictable. Prisoners were worked to collapse, beaten without cause, executed at random. Disease spread unchecked. Hunger was constant. And above all, the SS ruled with absolute, calculated cruelty. Pilecki understood immediately that survival alone was not enough. Within weeks, he began building a resistance network inside the camp. It became known as ZOW, the Union of Military Organizations. Operating in fragments to avoid total collapse, its members shared food, passed messages, sabotaged production when possible, and, most importantly, gathered intelligence. Piece by piece, Pilecki documented what he witnessed: mass executions, systematic starvation, the early stages of industrialized murder. Through couriers and smuggled reports, information flowed outward, to the Polish underground, and eventually to the Allies. These messages were among the first detailed accounts to describe the true nature of Auschwitz, not as a prison, but as a mechanism of annihilation. But knowledge came at a cost. As the camp expanded and killing accelerated, security tightened. Informants were uncovered, executions increased, entire resistance cells vanished overnight. Pilecki knew that discovery meant not just his death, but the destruction of the network he had built. Still, he remained. By 1943, Pilecki and his surviving comrades began planning something almost unthinkable: an uprising inside Auschwitz. The idea was simple in concept and impossible in practice: seize weapons, overwhelm guards, hold long enough for outside forces to intervene. But outside help never came. The Allies, receiving Pilecki's reports, struggled to reconcile them with strategic priorities. Proposals to bomb the camp or its rail lines were discussed, then dismissed. Auschwitz continued to operate, uninterrupted. Realizing the uprising would end only in massacre, Pilecki made another decision. If he could no longer change the camp from within, he would escape and testify in person. In April 1943, after nearly 3 years inside Auschwitz, Pilecki fled under cover of night. Gunfire followed. He was wounded, but he made it out alive. Free once more, he delivered his reports directly to resistance leaders. He pleaded again for action. Again, nothing came. When the war ended, Pilecki should have been celebrated as a hero. Instead, Poland fell under Soviet control. The same man who had willingly entered Auschwitz now found himself targeted by the new regime. Arrested by communist authorities, Pilecki was tortured, accused of espionage, and subjected to a show trial. In 1948, he was executed in a prison cellar. His burial place was concealed, his name erased. For decades, his story remained buried with him. Yet today, Witold Pilecki stands as one of the clearest examples of moral courage in the modern age, a man who entered hell by choice, not for glory, but to ensure the world would one day know the truth. Some fought oppression from within. Others met the enemy face to face, armed with weapons from another age. War is often defined by its machines, by the rifle, the tank, the aircraft. But for one British officer, the Second World War was fought as if modernity had taken a wrong turn somewhere along the way. Jack Churchill did not arrive on the battlefield carrying only the weapons of his time. He carried a longbow, a broadsword, and the unshakable belief that courage and momentum still mattered more than firepower. To those who saw him for the first time, he appeared an anachronism, a man displaced from another age. To those who fought beside him, he was something else entirely, a force of morale, discipline, and unsettling confidence. Churchill's war began early. In 1940, as British forces struggled to evacuate from Dunkirk under relentless German pressure, chaos ruled the beaches and surrounding countryside. Amid the retreat, Churchill is believed to have killed an enemy soldier with a longbow, a moment that may stand as the last recorded bow kill in modern warfare. Whether witnessed or not, the act captured the essence of the man, deliberate, controlled, and utterly indifferent to convention. As the war expanded, so did Churchill's legend. In Norway, during commando operations along fjords and mountain passes, he led raids marked by audacity and precision. Before assaults, he played the bagpipes, their sound echoing across cold water and rock, cutting through gunfire and confusion. To his men, the pipes were not theater. They were a signal, an announcement that the attack had already begun. Churchill often went into battle armed with his broadsword. He believed it proper equipment for an officer. When German positions were overrun, witnesses described him charging ahead of his men, blade drawn, moving with startling speed and composure. Against the logic of modern warfare, his presence seemed to bend the psychology of combat. The enemy hesitated. His own men advanced. Again and again, he defied expectation, not through recklessness, but through absolute certainty in his role. That certainty did not shield him from capture. During operations in Yugoslavia, Churchill was wounded and taken prisoner by German forces. Transported between camps, he attempted escape repeatedly, once making his way as far as Berlin before being recaptured. Even confinement could not extinguish his resolve. He treated captivity as a temporary inconvenience, not an ending. Eventually, he was sent to Sachsenhausen concentration camp, a place designed to break men. Yet, even there, Churchill continued planning escape. When the war neared its end and German control faltered, he and a small group of prisoners slipped away during a transfer. He walked for days through enemy territory until he encountered advancing Allied forces. For Churchill, the war ended as it had been lived, on foot, forward, unyielding. After the conflict, his nickname followed him, Mad Jack. But the name obscures more than it explains. He was not reckless. He was not unaware. He was disciplined, calculated, and psychologically formidable. His legacy is not measured in enemy casualties or territory seized, but in something harder to quantify: the power of conviction, morale, and the refusal to surrender identity to circumstance. In war, legends are born, and sometimes they are not even human. War does not belong solely to those who choose it. In 1942, as the Polish II Corps moved through the Middle East after years of exile and imprisonment, a group of soldiers encountered a young Syrian brown bear cub. He was small, malnourished, and alone, the last remnant of a hunt that had gone terribly wrong. The soldiers bought him from a local boy, not as a mascot, but as a life rescued in a landscape already drowning in loss. They named him Wojtek. At first, he was carried in their arms, fed from bottles, and sheltered from the heat of the desert. But as months passed, the cub grew, quickly and relentlessly. What began as an act of compassion became something else entirely, a presence woven into the daily rhythm of the unit. Wojtek learned to follow the soldiers, to wrestle playfully, to drink from bottles and mugs alike. He slept among them, rode in trucks, and reacted to gunfire not with panic, but with curiosity. To the men of the Polish II Corps, Wojtek became more than a companion. He became a reminder of normalcy in a world that had stripped it away. When the unit prepared to ship out toward Italy, regulations intervened. Animals were not permitted aboard transport vessels. Faced with the prospect of leaving Wojtek behind, the soldiers found a solution that spoke volumes about his place among them. They enlisted him. Wojtek was officially registered as a private in the Polish army, complete with rank, serial number, and rations. It was a bureaucratic formality, but also a quiet acknowledgement. He belonged to them, and they to him. By 1944, the Polish II Corps was committed to one of the most brutal engagements of the Italian campaign, the Battle of Monte Cassino. The monastery above the valley had become a fortress, dominating the approaches and exacting a terrible toll on Allied forces. Artillery fire pounded the slopes. Infantry assault stalled under relentless resistance. Amid the chaos, Wojtek moved with the men. Accounts from the battle describe the bear carrying heavy crates of artillery shells, mimicking the soldiers he had watched for months. He did not panic under fire. He did not flee explosions. He lifted the crates in his forelegs and transported them to the guns over and over again, as if he understood the urgency of the moment. Whether driven by imitation or instinct hardly mattered. What mattered was the effect. For exhausted soldiers battered by weeks of combat, Wojtek's presence cut through despair. He brought laughter, yes, but more importantly, he brought resolve. If a bear could endure the fire and noise of Monte Cassino without faltering, then so could they. The battle was eventually won. The cost was immense. After the war, the Polish II Corps was relocated to Scotland. Wojtek went with them. But as soldiers demobilized and returned to civilian life, or found themselves unable to return home at all, Wojtek's future became uncertain. Eventually, he was housed at the Edinburgh Zoo. Visitors saw a bear, but those who knew his story saw something more. Former soldiers visited him regularly, calling out to him, saluting, offering cigarettes, which he accepted with familiar curiosity, though he did not smoke them. To them, Wojtek remained a comrade, a living symbol of shared survival. Wojtek lived out his days far from the battlefields that had shaped him, but his legacy endured. He became an emblem of resilience, loyalty, and the strange bonds forged by war. proof that even in humanity's darkest hours, connection and compassion could survive. War does not reward only courage. Sometimes it elevates those willing to operate in the shadows. Otto Skorzeny did not rise through the ranks as a frontline soldier. He emerged from a different current of the war, one defined by deception, infiltration, and psychological disruption. An Austrian engineer by training, Skorzeny joined the SS with little early distinction. He was not initially marked for greatness. What set him apart was something quieter and more unsettling, an instinct for unconventional solutions and a willingness to operate without clear boundaries. That instinct caught Adolf Hitler's attention. As Germany's military situation deteriorated, Hitler began searching for men capable of achieving what conventional forces could not. Missions that demanded audacity, improvisation, and the ability to impose fear disproportionate to actual strength. Skorzeny fit the profile. He was tall, imposing, and unflinchingly confident, a man who projected authority even when surrounded by chaos. He was selected for operations others considered impossible. Skorzeny trained his units differently from standard formations. His men learned foreign languages, enemy uniforms, and false identities. They practiced sabotage, disinformation, and psychological warfare, techniques designed not to destroy armies directly, but to paralyze them with uncertainty. In Skorzeny's hands, confusion became a weapon. His most famous operation came in September 1943. Benito Mussolini, Italy's fallen dictator, had been arrested and imprisoned by his own government. He was held at the Gran Sasso mountain resort, high in the Apennines, accessible only by cable car and heavily guarded. A rescue seemed unthinkable. Skorzeny led the mission anyway. Using gliders, his force descended silently onto the mountaintop plateau. The landing was violent and uncontrolled, yet the shock alone was enough. Guards were overwhelmed without significant resistance. Within minutes, Mussolini was free. Photographs of Skorzeny standing beside the rescued leader were circulated widely, not just as propaganda, but as a message. Germany still possessed the ability to strike where it pleased. The operation transformed Skorzeny into a legend within the Third Reich. But his most destabilizing work came later, during the Battle of the Bulge. In December 1944, as German forces launched their last major offensive in the West, Skorzeny was tasked with Operation Greif. His men, fluent in English and dressed in Allied uniforms, were sent behind enemy lines to sow chaos. They changed road signs, spread false orders, redirected units. Their actual numbers were limited, but the effect was enormous. Allied paranoia exploded. Checkpoints multiplied. Soldiers were detained for failing to answer trivial questions about American culture. Commanders diverted resources inward, hunting infiltrators who might not even exist. The psychological impact far outweighed the physical damage. He was also linked, directly or indirectly, to other high-risk operations, attempted assassinations of partisan leader Josip Broz Tito, and even rumored involvement in a plot to assassinate Allied leaders in Tehran. Some plans never progressed beyond theory. Others failed outright, but the pattern was clear. Skorzeny was deployed wherever uncertainty itself could be weaponized. By war's end, he was one of the most wanted men in Europe. Captured by Allied forces, Skorzeny was placed on trial for violating the laws of war, particularly for the use of enemy uniforms. He was acquitted, but his story did not end there. In 1948, he escaped from custody under circumstances that remain unclear, aided, some believe, by former comrades or sympathetic networks. In the years that followed, Skorzeny drifted through the shadows of the Cold War. He worked as a military advisor, a security consultant, and a fixer for regimes and movements navigating the post-war world. His clients ranged across continents. His loyalties remained opaque. He lived not as a fugitive, but as a man who had learned how to survive beyond the reach of accountability. Otto Skorzeny's legacy is deeply unsettling. He was tactically brilliant, undeniably effective, and morally compromised. He demonstrated how warfare could be shaped not just by force, but by fear, confusion, and perception. In the end, Skorzeny did not win the war for Germany, but he changed how wars would be fought, and in doing so, he left behind a lesson that still echoes, that the most dangerous weapons are not always the loudest nor the most visible, but the ones that move unseen. War has a way of reducing the world to its barest elements, mud and steel, fear and resolve, life measured in moments, and survival balanced against chance. Across different fronts, different nations, and different causes, these 6 stories never truly intersected. The men and the bear never met. They did not fight for the same flag, nor believe in the same future. Some stood on opposite sides of history itself, yet they share something unmistakable. Each shows what a single life can become when war strips the world down to its extremes. Leo Major showed how defiance, sharpened by loss, could liberate a city without an army behind it. Michael Wittmann demonstrated how skill and machine could merge into something terrifyingly effective, and how quickly the battlefield claims even its most feared figures. Witold Pilecki revealed the cost of moral courage, choosing to enter hell not to survive it, but to bear witness for those who could not. Jack Churchill reminded the world that identity, conviction, and momentum can still shape outcomes even in the age of mechanized slaughter. Wojtek embodied resilience in its purest form, a reminder that even in war's cruelty, connection and loyalty endure. And Otto Skorzeny showed how warfare itself was evolving, where deception, fear, and perception could be as decisive as firepower. Together, they reveal the full spectrum of human capacity in war: courage and brutality, sacrifice and ingenuity, compassion and moral compromise. History often presents the Second World War as a sequence of decisions made by leaders and generals. Conferences, speeches, and maps dominate the narrative, but wars are not won on paper. They are carried forward by individuals, by soldiers whose names rarely survive the passage of time. Foot soldiers, scouts, prisoners, commandos, even those history struggles to categorize. They are remembered locally, sometimes quietly, sometimes not at all. And yet, the world we inherited was shaped by their actions, their endurance, and often their suffering. History remembers the leaders, but it is shaped by the soldiers who refused to break. If this story made you reflect on the unseen lives that shaped our world, consider supporting the channel. And tell us, which of these stories will you remember after today?